95% of what we do is the same. How we experience every day, so much of it is the same. But what I really like to hear is that you are focusing on the married-ins, because of course the married-ins all too often, right, they're the female lines, right? And that's particularly important for us to think about in our industry, because the younger the women, the more interested they are in understanding the family wealth, making decisions around the family wealth, starting their own businesses. And there are so many metrics that show us that women are becoming entrepreneurs at a faster rate than men right now. They're very successful when they have the opportunity to be entrepreneurs or make investments. And so to privilege the women's voice and their stories is really important for the families we work with and the rising gens.
Yeah, and I'll add to that one of my favorite events that I got to be part of and help put on was we called it Herstory instead of history, and it was really inviting multi-generational women from different families to come together and learn about storytelling. And see, everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has different memories about what may have happened in the past, and giving them a chance to play with some ways to tell stories effectively, and then to encourage them to do storytelling within the family, and then having like the younger ones interview the older, and then the older interview the younger as well, and how they see it and what they remember. And it was super well attended, and the women got so much out of it. It's like they didn't want it to end. You have a great event when it's like it finishes and everybody's still lingering and they're still talking to each other. And we used a story in it to get the thing started. And I thought it'd be fun to share it just briefly here, because it's an apocryphal story, but it's very telling in terms of what can happen in families. So it's where a young granddaughter, maybe 7 or 8, goes up to her mom, and she sees her mom getting ready to put a roast in the oven, and she cuts off the end of the roast, right? And she puts it in the pan and she puts it in the oven, and the little girl says, "Why do you cut the end of the roast off?" And she says, "Oh, my mother always did that." And so she goes and she asks her grandmother, "Why do you cut the end of the roast off?" And she says, oh my gosh, when our apartment was so small and my oven was so tiny, I only could fit this tiny little pan. I could never fit a whole roast in there. And it was like, oh, asking these questions could be really useful, because you can pass down things that, well, it made sense to my mom, so it must make sense to me, when actually it doesn't make sense to do it anymore. And it's just a good reminder that by asking the questions and connecting with family around, not just the story, but what was happening then, and why do you think that way, or you really get to find out what do we want to bring forward, and what makes sense, and what might we want to modify now that we're in modern times. So
isn't that fascinating too, Emily, how in that story, it's just 2 generations ago when that family lived in really tiny quarters and had to make sacrifices that 2 generations later they couldn't even imagine. And in that intervening generation, it already became like an afterthought, so but to be able to bring that perspective is so important. And that's a funny story too. And your Herstory event reminded me of a really poignant and empowering moment that we experienced at a women's retreat that we hosted a few years ago. And it was just women. And we had an icebreaker where I went and did some digging into all of the attendees' histories, family histories, and I really tried to focus on the maternal lines of their families and come up with some object, some picture that represented their family based on something that I found. And then the people had to ask questions of each other and try to figure out what picture belonged to whom. And so this one person, I didn't find much on her mother's family, but I did find something about her father. And it was like just this simple picture of a potato. But her sister-in-law said to me, "You changed my sister's life through this event." And it's because she had married in to the business owning family, and her husband had run the business. And throughout her adult life, she was known as the wife of, right? And he died suddenly. And all of a sudden she had all of this wealth, all of these decisions to make. And she was a strong, intelligent, productive woman. She worked. There wasn't anything like that going on. But all of a sudden, now she was the widow of, or the wife of, right? And she was still in that state for years and kind of paralyzed in it. Well, just through this simple exercise that enabled her to talk about her father, again, she literally found her voice. And going forward was much more comfortable talking about her perspective on the decisions that should be made, and being able to express her pride in her family's story, which of course she had passed on to her kids in, maybe passive ways, maybe implicit ways, or direct. But it was a really powerful moment. Just allowing her to focus on her story literally empowered her.
Love it. It's so important to be cognizant and mindful of other people's story, and it makes a difference. And when you do, the other part that comes from that is, it's that the rule of reciprocity. When we're mindful of other people's stories, then they're more mindful of ours. And we want, whether it's the husband or the wife, we want them to be mindful of that story, because we want to share it with the joint children, and we want both sides matter.